In 1983, Dr. Luc Montagnier and his team of researchers identified what they thought might be the cause of AIDS.
I really was excited because we knew it was a new type of virus, not shown before in men, and very likely to be the cause of AIDS. Of course, at that time, we didn't have the full proof of what's the cause of AIDS.
That initial work was rapidly reinforced by additional virology and serology studies in Bob Gallo's lab in Washington.
Gallo got pushed by the Reagan administration that wanted to do something on AIDS finally. They literally told us to just close CDC's lab down. We don't care about it. There's a bunch of gays, who gives a shit? I mean, that was really their whole story. So the whole thing that they rested their political response was, well, we discovered the virus.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The probable cause of AIDS has been found.
Credit must go to our eminent Dr. Robert Gallo, who directed the research that produced this discovery.
What was new that day is for the first time we were saying, that's the cause, I'm sure.
It was a silly press conference. There was not evidence then that HIV was the cause of AIDS. It wasn't called HIV. There was certainly evidence that he didn't discover it. It was discovered in France.
The conference was held before any of Robert Gallo's papers were published. Therefore, before any other scientist had a chance to review them and look at the evidence and see if he got it right or wrong.
Gallo's philosophy was to have people to whom he would give the virus be in his own control, so that any information that came out of that would come through him, so that he got all the information. Indeed, often put his name on publications and would, quote, collaborate with them. But should you have any broader view other than his personal glory and your personal glory, this was not a scientific pursuit in any way.
The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services decided from now on, we are only going to fund AIDS research that assumes that Robert Gallo's virus is the cause.
I didn't think that HIV in 1984 was the cause of AIDS. That's why I did the study comparing gay men with Kaposi's and gay men with pneumocystis. I assumed there must be something else. If you go read my paper from 1985 that Kern and Jaffe would not sign on to, I actually lay out the cofactor hypothesis in that paper.
I'm a promoter of the role of cofactors in AIDS.
Well, cofactors just says that the cause of a disease is by more than one factor.
Just simply being infected with HIV is not going to do it. You need certain cofactors.
Cofactors are not necessary.
Dr. Fauci would say HIV causes AIDS without the need for anything else. That's kind of ridiculous.
The data that indicate that any different type of infection like mycoplasma or something like that is a necessary cofactor, I believe those theories have been debunked.
What the fuck does he mean? Sorry. What's it? What does he mean that there are no cofactors? Where's he coming from? There's cofactors for everything.
Cofactor implies something specific. And it really gets us off into tracks that are wandering.
Gallo isn't gonna change his mind. He's probably 70 years plus now. He's gonna remember things. Yeah, we all remember things that are good for us, and we forget the bad things. The cofactors are important to really understand how people get ill, why they get ill.
What is asked of an AIDS journalist is to deny an existing reality, which is a strong, growing body of dissent on a scientific question.
In August of '92, my dad had just read his latest National Review, and there was an article in there about Peter Duesberg, a maverick cell biologist. He said he didn't think HIV caused AIDS.
To deny that this well-identified, well-characterized virus is linked with AIDS is, to my mind, just potty.
He said, I can't replicate this in my office. I can't get this virus to do anything. We thought, oh my gosh, my dad is really daydreaming. He's trying to wish this all away because he knows how upset we are. Just wish it all away, and everybody will be gone happy.
If Fauci would say, here's $1 billion for alternative theories of AIDS, you wouldn't believe what's going to happen. A lot of HIV researchers overnight would would start cofactors. The first year they would call them cofactors of HIV. And the next year, the co would be topped and HIV would be topped a year later.
Peter is highly intelligent. He did excellent work. I mean, no wonder he got a full professorship in Berkeley and was nominated to the American Academy of Sciences. But I told him very frankly that he's killing people with his theories, and I still stick to that.
They attack him, they attack his ideas, and they present some bogus way of refuting what his science has said that doesn't really refute it.
Peter Duisberg?
Yes.
Oh.
They're all prostitutes, most of them, my colleagues, to some degree, myself. You have to be a prostitute to get money for your research. You're trained a little bit to be a prostitute. But some go all the way.
In light of all this scientific uncertainty, I asked Dr. Fauci for evidence linking HIV to immune deficiency disease.
When you put the combined findings of the initial characterization as a distinct retrovirus isolated by Montagnier and his group, together with Gallo linking the virus to being the cause of AIDS, and they put those things together, and that's how we have a confirmation of the causative agent of AIDS, namely HIV.
Still unclear about the evidence for HIV's existence, I decided the best way to verify it would be to actually see it. I asked Dr. Hans Gelderblum, a world-renowned electron microscopist, if he thought there was any reason to question Dr. Montagnier's published images.
I've seen these publications, stamp-size images. It's a nuisance. It's a nuisance. You do not really see much.
When we saw that photo, we said, suggestive, but not convincing.
Dr. Gallo, 1 year later, published photographs he claimed to be of HIV. Were his any better?
These pictures were not so impressive. They were not much better than Montagnier's images.
It's one thing to look like, and another thing is to be a virus.
In 2002, I stumbled across an article by Valander Turner and Andrew McIntyre of the Perth Group in Australia, and it questions whether there's ever even been found a virus. I became consumed with researching this. I could read from morning till night every day, and every link to another link, and I would email to these people and say, where's the test? I want to know. Am I dying? Am I contagious? And they weren't even very kind. They were just like, read our articles again. How many times do we have to tell you there's no test?
It is crucial to understand that an AIDS diagnosis is forever. It cannot be reversed or alleviated.
The stigma attached to people knowing that you have it and are living with it is worse than actually living with it.
I can't think of anybody who's ever been evicted from their apartment because they had breast cancer or because they had cerebral palsy.
I did a campaign to address stigma. The message is that if anyone is infected, we are all affected. Some have it medically, some have it socially, some have it culturally. And at the end of the day, if it exists anywhere, it exists everywhere.
We don't all have AIDS. And once you start bullshitting, it's a problem. You know, we don't all have AIDS. We all have to be sympathetic to AIDS. And yes, there's all kinds of people who get HIV infection. But we don't need to make, in my view, non-truths, or just to have a slogan or a symbol. We all have AIDS. No, we don't all have AIDS.
But my message is you do have it, whether you want to accept it or not. Are you medically susceptible? Maybe not. But are you socially vulnerable? Yes.
In June of 2007, the BBC featured a news story which began, HIV infection theory challenged.
Living cells are complicated, and how they work inside the body is even more complicated. So there's still a lot of debate as to how exactly HIV causes AIDS.
In March of 2008, the Washington Post went on to state that multiple surprises have reminded researchers how much they still don't know about HIV's biology.
HIV has got to get inside the circulation of the body, and it does that in ways that are not completely understood.
The prime target for HIV is a T cell population called CD4 helper T cells.
The way that the virus gets into the target cell, it fuses its membrane to the membrane of the cell.
I don't understand the fusion process. I don't think anybody completely understands it.
We have a relatively poor understanding of how viral proteins interact with proteins in the cell.
How come our antibodies aren't able to keep HIV in check?
It's an excellent question. That's one of the great stumbling blocks.
They can't prove that HIV is the cause of AIDS, okay? They cannot prove that HIV is the cause of the collapse of the immune system, no matter how many scientific journals says it is. When you go to the basic research, it doesn't prove it.
We are almost convinced that there is other factors that are involved in the loss of CD4 cells, and we don't know yet all the mechanism.
How HIV depletes the T cells so an individual advances to AIDS is probably due to multifactorial elements. One is it will kill the cell eventually that it infects. HIV does not necessarily kill the cells that it infects. Some T cells are directly killed by HIV, and other T cells keep the virus in check. It's a silent state within the cell, and I think in many cases these cells can return to a normal function.
Can that cell return to a normal state? I don't think so.
When I was told I was HIV positive, I accepted that on a very deep level. But only by having the courage, the open minds, and the open hearts to answer these questions are we ever going to know how to help people, how to do what we need to do to help people.
In late 2007, Science Daily reported that 3 prominent research teams had published papers in the Journal of Immunology challenging the theory that the sudden loss of T cells triggers disease and AIDS.
The details of HIV pathogenesis, how HIV kills people, are still being worked out.
If the sudden loss of T cells in HIV-positive individuals can't explain why people get disease, then there must be cofactors that cause people to get sick and die, or factors that have absolutely nothing to do with HIV. While researching HIV hotspots, I began to realize there is a direct correlation in these places with another condition that leads to immune deficiency and death.
I think it is important to keep in mind, especially for us in the West, that poverty is not a romantic issue. It is a deadly issue. Poverty leads to diseases and premature death, period.
When you look at the symptoms that they talk about, for people that are HIV positive, you find that some of them, they are more related to malnutrition.
Their nutrition is not very equilibrated. They are in oxidative stress, even they are not infected with HIV. So their immune system doesn't work well already.
People are hungry, they're underdeveloped, there are no hospitals, there's no proper medical care. You take away poverty, you're giving people an ability to fight infections.
These are toilets.
Yeah.
We don't have flushing toilets. When flies get into the toilets, they actually come back to touch our food, you see. And look, we need to take that food. And we don't know which infections are there.
So how do you expect people must survive in these places? Look there. How many white people they are staying in this house like this one?
In Cape Town, it's different. You go to suburbs, you see the suburbs different from our places. Why have we done nothing for African people, just like give them clean water so they don't die in infancy of diarrheal disease and stuff like this? All we care about is HIV, AIDS. Well, question. Well, there's money in it. There has to be, other dynamic working to lead public interest to the African situation and ignore clean water, sanitation, malaria. I mean, things that kill people.
This is the beginning of a war. It is a war to reclaim our health.
In 2008, USA Today published a news story that stated, "If we look at the data objectively, we are spending too much on AIDS. About $10 billion a year is spent on AIDS, while 2 billion people live with no sanitation. 1 billion lack access to clean water. And malnutrition kills someone every 10 seconds. These factors enable diseases to thrive and severely weaken the immune system of those living in such squalor."
If we were to take all that money and put it towards developing poor countries, God would be so proud of us, indeed, because we would have taken away the major challenge that's facing humankind, and that is people dying in silence. It's slow, painful deaths from being scared of something that was just packaged as AIDS.
Could it be that the real epidemic is extreme poverty, not HIV? On the other hand, HIV allegedly occurs in the United States as well. So I looked for alternative causes of immunodeficiency in this wealthiest of nations.
There are other ways you could produce a condition that looks like AIDS, but they too will be some source that causes a severe defect in the immune response.
19 million Americans now, 19 million are taking illicit drugs every day. But we don't talk about this. This is politically incorrect.
There have been a number of theories as to what the origin of HIV/AIDS is. One of them was a theory that certainly turned out to be completely incorrect, that it's a lifestyle phenomenon.
There's a large epidemic of STDs in general in the late 70s, and particularly in gay men. In San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles were meccas of the new lifestyle, which came from the liberation in the post-Stonewall era.
The more partners you could have, the more you were striking a blow for gay lib. I remember talking to one of the people who was at the forefront of that lifestyle. It very much felt like if he did have another bout of syphilis or gonorrhea, whatever it might be, that it was like a notch, a victory notched up for his right to exist as a gay man.
I went on a vacation to Los Angeles, and it wasn't that wild, but one night I went to a bathhouse. I came home with, get this, at the same time, syphilis, gonorrhea, and 2 forms of parasites.
I have no views about that, in a judgmental kind of sense, but certainly from a public health point of view, that's kind of a prescription for disaster, because AIDS first occurred in these men who were not healthy for reasons that were obvious to everyone.
You're talking thousands of partners, sometimes hundreds, per month, lots of antibiotic use, lots of drug use, and the result were people were getting pretty sick.
There's a drug called amyl nitrate that was developed in the 1850s and 60s. Came in ampules, and they became known as poppers because you'd pop them when you open these ampules up to sniff them when you had coronary artery disease. The first AIDS cases, for example, that Mike Gottlieb reported were all 5 gay men. They were young. They all used poppers.
Poppers, something you walk around huffing all night. I mean, it says flammable, fatal if swallowed on the side of the bottle. They're walking around huffing it all night long. Why? Gives you a great rush.
Poppers was a sex drug. They were in every gay bathhouse, every bar, every porno bookstore across the nation. Poppers were visible on the dance floor in the discos. At the end of an evening, the bartender would announce, last call for alcohol, last call for poppers.
It was like a mad, wonderful
kind of a dance that was being done. But if you think that can happen forever, you're wrong.
Whether or not HIV exists, whether its role in a weakened immune system is almost irrelevant when you compare it to what was going on at that time.
The lifestyle explanation proved politically unacceptable, but the virus explanation proved very, very acceptable to many different parties.
Pneumocystis pneumonia and Kaposi sarcoma were the hallmark diseases for AIDS in the early years.
To go back and deconstruct it and say, what exactly did cause pneumocystis carinea?
I remember the first patient that I ever saw, my resident brought me to see a young gay man with pneumocystis pneumonia. I knew a little bit about the use of poppers or amyl nitrite inhalants, and I started asking the patient if he used them, and it turned out that he was a very heavy user of amyl nitrites, and much to the surprise of my students, I said, I think the man probably has destroyed his pulmonary immune system by inhaling this toxin.
What exactly caused Kaposi sarcoma? We know that now. It was amyl nitrite.
We saw KS decline, interestingly parallel to the decline in popper use.
We now know that Kaposi sarcoma is caused by a second virus, the human herpes virus strain 8.
To rescue comes another virus. As always, when you're in trouble, you find another virus.
If one wants to look at really what causes this, we've got to look beyond just HIV and just beyond HHV8.
Calling it a disease, see? And to give it that name, AIDS. So everything's included under that, and you don't have to just say, I mean, if you'd have said, you know, these people are getting a lot of weird diseases, all kinds of diseases, it wouldn't have had the same impact. It was much better to say, there is an infectious organism on the loose in America, and it could get you.
I had interviewed the world's leading HIV experts and discovered that the two benchmark diseases of AIDS have alternate explanations. Once again, I turned to Dr. Gelderblum, seeking proof of HIV's existence in the most recent images available.
Here, you do not see anything about the details, but I would say it's probably a virus.
These are HIV here?
Yeah.
Oh, so are these HIV too?
Yeah, yeah.
Everything's
Probably.
Probably.
Yeah.
What can I tell you? You know, I mean, it exists.
Gallo said he had all these viruses, and it was a lie.
I think HIV totally has turned out not to be the cause of AIDS. HIV has turned out not to be.
Gelderblum's images, said to come from isolated HIV cultures, provided no proof for HIV's existence. So I asked Nobel laureate Dr. David Baltimore and Dr. Robin Weiss how they would isolate and photograph this elusive virus.
Well, didn't Dr. Gallo do that? I mean, he actually isolated it, so... Yeah. I mean, why should I do all of this? This is all textbook stuff you're asking me.
I'm not quite sure what's behind your question about isolation.
I don't want to be your textbook, you know? Okay. I got other things to do.
They're embarrassed. The scientists have been embarrassed about this. They know that it's flawed.
In 1987, the CDC made two mind-boggling changes in the definition of AIDS, which are in effect today. You can be diagnosed with AIDS without ever having an HIV test.
In 1987, I had a lesion on my arm, and it was KS, Kaposi sarcoma.
The doctor diagnosed you with AIDS without an HIV test?
Yeah.
You can be diagnosed with AIDS if you've tested negative for HIV.
Alvin Friedman Keene found 16 patients with Kaposi sarcoma among gay men in New York City in the 80s. They did not have HIV infection. Yet they had AIDS by our definition, right?
In a World Health Organization publication, Dr. Chin writes, "It should be emphasized that the surveillance definitions for AIDS were not intended to be reliable indicators of HIV infection."
If you have thousands of documented cases of AIDS without HIV,
how can HIV cause AIDS?
Why do you believe that HIV does cause AIDS?
Because that's all the information that I've been given.
Because we've never been taught anything different. We have read it, heard it.
Because that's what the scientific community has told us.
Scientists are supposed to observe, experiment, and reason from what they observe. They're not supposed to grab hold of an idea and cling to it and adjust everything else in their perceptions to fit that idea.
I think an HIV positive test means that your life is forever changed. You have a whole new battery of things to consider for yourself. What does it mean to me?
It's very hard to find anyone who supports you when you say, I don't think I'm going to die of HIV or AIDS.
The typical model of HIV equals AIDS equals death. How invested am I going to be in that model?
Everyone who's infected with HIV would like to deny it. I mean, it's a bad prognosis. It means you're going to take drugs for the rest of your life, et cetera, et cetera. So there's people who want to say, I'm one of the people who tested positive, but I'm not going to get the disease.
Do I start treatment? Treatment meaning the antiviral drugs, if ever.